The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and welcome to another 1615 webinar. I'm Matthew Ellison, president at 1615, and I also serve as a church missions coach. And it is our pleasure to serve the body of Christ in this way by bringing resources and teaching and training that will help them deepen their engagement in the Great Commission. Now, before we get into today's subject, the global water crisis, how clean water opens doors, I want to let you all know about some upcoming events and resources that you can take advantage of. Last year, we released a book. I co-authored it with Denny Spitters from Pioneers. It's entitled When Everything is Missions. There is great confusion about the Great Commission today, and we believe that it has great consequences. And in this book, we help readers think about a biblical understanding of missions. What is the Great Commission? What does its fulfillment actually require? And we ask 7 key questions that will help readers shape their understanding of global missions. We certainly hope you'll take advantage of it. You can buy the book at wheneverythingismissions.com. We also have a podcast on iTunes that you can subscribe to. We also have another resource that we're very excited about. We launched it several years ago. It's called the Mission Table. And what we do at the Mission Table is we gather leading missions thinkers and practitioners, and we tackle some of the most critical, controversial topics impacting the missions world today. We are rolling out season 3 as we speak. We just launched another episode about 2 weeks ago called Should America Be First? And we really address this idea of, as Christians, is our worldview shaped by Bible or by politics? It's a great conversation, a great debate, and there's plenty of other archived episodes as well. We hope you'll take advantage of this really important resource. And then we have a webinar library. We've been doing webinars since 2011. We do probably 8 to 10 a year, again, where we gather some leading missions practitioners and we get them to share their understanding, their learning, their resources. And so you can get online and search a wide range of topics and resources, engaging speakers. There's over 50 webinars that are available for you to view. You can access those at 1615.org/webinars, or just go to 1615.org and click on the resources tab at the top. So today's webinar is entitled The Global Water Crisis, How Clean Water Opens Doors. It's a gift that so many of us take for granted, but access to clean water is something that around 663 million people across the globe simply don't have. And for these people, disease and lack of access don't just alter lives, they can create larger issues for the communities at large, from death and sickness to lack of employment and education. Fortunately, the answer is pretty simple. In this webinar, we're going to talk about how to provide access to clean water and how that will change the living conditions in a village immediately. But more importantly, and this is what I'm most excited about when it comes to Water of Life, providing these clean water opportunities grants access for pastors to share the gospel of Christ in otherwise hostile communities. Today's subject matter expert is Sarah Kelly, who currently serves as the executive director at Water of Life. In just a moment, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Sarah and the controls, but first, a few details. So for those of you online, your phones are muted to preserve sound quality. You can listen through your computer speakers, or you can call in on the telephone. As questions come to mind today, and we certainly hope they do, you can type them in the question and answer panel located in the GoToWebinar task panel on the upper right-hand side of your screen. Sarah will be addressing your questions for the last 10 or 15 minutes of our time together. And this is really your opportunity to enter into the conversation and address any questions you have with Sarah. So I want to remind everyone this webinar is being recorded. It will be available for viewing at 1615.org within the week. So Sarah, I'm going to hand this over to you in just a moment. And I want to thank you so much for taking time today to share with us. Sarah, it's all yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Like you said, I am Sarah Kelly. I serve as the executive director for Water of Life, which is a nonprofit which is focused on fulfilling the Great Commission to go and make disciples. And the most effective way of living into this calling that we found is through the gift of clean water. But before we can quite get into how we're living into the Great Commission, we've got to spend just a little bit of time getting to know the problem that we're working to address. So according to the UN, I'll get this down. All right, according to the UN, 2/3 of the world's population currently live in areas that experience water scarcity for at least 1 month a year. So in most parts of the US, we experience 4 seasons. There's winter, spring, summer, fall. I live in the South, so we're in the middle of spring right now, or otherwise known as pollen season, at least where I live. But a large portion of the world, particularly as you get closer to the equator, really only have 2 seasons, which is rainy and dry. And so many places around the world have water, but during this dry season, 2/3 of the world's population has water scarcity for at least 1 month out of the year. And that second statistic, I feel like as soon as I submitted this webinar, just became out of date. So I'm going to give you a little background. So that statistic comes from research that UNICEF, in combination with the World Health Organization, released in 2015. They released a report that estimated that 663 million people lack access from an improved water source. The problem with this definition was that this improved water source was a little vague, but it's the best that we had, and so it's what Water of Life, along with most other water organizations, used. But they just came out with a better definition. So the new working definition that we're using is that 159 million people collect drinking water directly from surface water. These are rivers, streams, ponds. If you're watching this on your computer, it's the picture that you see. So that's 159 million people that collect drinking water from this. That I don't think really hit me until the first time I traveled to Sierra Leone. I'm a mother, I have 2 children myself, and while I was there in the village that we were at, I saw a mother with 2 children about the same age as mine that walked down a path with her kids in tow, looked into what looked to me like a hole in the ground. I think the actual term for this is called an open well, but it was really just a dugout hole with water at the bottom with bugs and leaves and kind of whatever fell into it. Hooked her bucket on the end of the stick, lowered it down into the hole, pulled it back up, and that's the water that she was going to use to her family. And I think seeing that and trying to imagine if I was in that same situation and if that's what I had to do to provide water for my children, that really just hit kind of how real this is and what a problem it is. So that's the reality for 159 million people. 844 million people lack access to basic water service. And the definition that they're using for this is drinking water from an improved source that can be accessed within 30 minutes, including waiting time. So that's obviously bigger than that 663 million that we were using, but it's that time that they're using. So this might mean that there's an improved water source in the village next to you, but it's going to take longer than 30 minutes for you to get it. It might also mean that there is one well in your village serving 500 families, but once people queue up in line for that, it's going to take you longer than 30 minutes to wait and collect your water. So that village would need a second well. So that 844 million is becoming the more used and understood statistic that water organizations are using. For those 844 million people, lack of access to an improved water source within 30 minutes is not just a problem in itself, but it affects all aspects of their lives. So in the next couple slides, we're going to take you through the following 3 aspects that it affects: their health, their income potential, and their education. So waterborne diseases kill more children under the age of 5 each year than malaria, measles, and HIV/AIDS combined. And 80% of all illnesses in the developing world come out of waterborne diseases. And these are things like typhoid fever, cholera, and hepatitis A. It's also said that 6 to 8 million people each year in these developing nations will die from preventable waterborne diseases. Most of the symptoms of these waterborne diseases are severe diarrhea, which leads to dehydration. And when your only drinking water is contaminated, it's a vicious cycle that many don't recover from. Also, if they do recover, their system is also weakened, which leaves them susceptible to other diseases. It's also known that the average family in Africa uses 5 gallons of water a day, while the average American family uses closer to 100. To put that in a little context, just by flushing your toilet an average amount in the day, and this is a modern toilet, you will use around 9.1 gallons. And if you have an older toilet, say pre-1980, you might be using closer to 48 gallons of water. Water of Life also hosted a dinner where the mayor of a Liberian town spoke, and it was your usual dinner where we're gathered around tables, the plates are all set, you have glasses of water sitting out, you have the choice, for tea or lemonade, but everybody had glasses of water, and the mayor looked around the room during part of her presentation and just made the statement of how many people were in the room, how many glasses of water were sitting on the table. And she said, at the end of tonight, you'll just leave it. Any water that you don't drink, you'll leave on the table. And she didn't mean it as a guilt trip. And I don't mean the amount of water you're going to use today to flush your toilet as a guilt trip. But I do think it speaks to the fact that we take it for granted that when I turn on the sink to brush my teeth, that water is clean and I can use it. But it's something that millions around this world are working so hard for. This 5 gallons that they collect and will use in a day weighs 40 pounds. And if you can see in the picture, those yellow cans, they're often called jerry cans. A lot of times they're recycled oil that they'll use to collect the water and carry back. But they'll carry it on their heads. And so not only is it heavy and they're having to walk for it, is that the repetition of carrying this weight often leads to head, neck, back, kind of joint issues from just walking with the weight of that water on your head, because the average distance to collect the water is 3.75 miles. So as you can imagine, walking 3.75 miles is very time consuming. The physical act of collecting, again, often contaminated water, takes hours out of a person's day. And women are the ones often tasked with collecting this water. Combined with their other household chores, water collection is often all that they have time to do, and it's by far the largest use of their time. If you just swap out the time that women in India spend collecting water with the time that they could be spending on income generating activities, it's estimated that the national GDP of that country would be 10 billion, which is about $160 million higher than it is right now. Again, this is not even if all of these women had full-time jobs. That is just if you swap out the time that they spend walking, collecting, walking back home water with something they could do to sell in their village, a service that they could do, anything that really would generate income. The result would be about $160 million collectively. Also, in most of these countries, there's no such thing as paid time off. They don't get sick days. And so if a working member of the family can't work because they fall ill, they don't get paid. And so many of them are scraping by on such a little amount of money to begin with that if you miss a day's wages, oftentimes it means you're not eating that day. You can't afford to go to the market and buy food because you didn't go to work and get paid. lack of proper nutrition, we know, can make you more susceptible to diseases in general. And so often they find themselves in kind of this vicious cycle of illness and missing work and missing food, and illness and missing work and missing food, that's just really hard for people to get out of on their own. Another cycle that villages find themselves in without clean water is the lack of education. So it is almost impossible, not impossible, but really, really hard for a child to receive a quality education if they don't have access to clean water. If a mother is ill, if she's caring for a newborn, sometimes if she's in the late stages of pregnancy, if she's had some sort of injury, anything that would cause the mother, who's usually the primary person responsible for collecting this water, if she is unable to collect water by herself, that doesn't mean that the family's need for water goes away. Somebody has to go get it every single day. And so usually, if a mother can't do it and the father has to go to work, oftentimes that falls to her daughter. And if her daughter is now spending hours collecting water, is unable to keep up with her schooling, it's her education that's going to suffer. We also know that if you don't have an education, it limits her future job prospects. On the other hand, even if you have time to attend school, if they have a water source really close by, oftentimes the water that they're collecting is what's making them too sick. And so, if their fathers are sick and can't make it to work, the kids are exactly the same. Kids can't attend school when they've fallen ill from the water that they have to drink. And just like the cycle of income opportunity on the parent side, it's another cycle that without education, your job prospects are limited. And if you can't attend school because of water, again, you're just kind of repeating the cycle that's really hard to break. So it might sound simple, but the solution to a lot of these problems is to bring them clean water. You've got education and income and the ability to work. If you can keep the family healthy, it empowers them to be able to do all of these things. So Water of Life's mission is simple. We work to provide clean, fresh water to unreached, untouched areas across West Africa and India. And because we know that this impact is going to touch not just the water, it's going to impact almost all aspects of village life. There are 5 things that we are committed to do with each well that we drill. The first thing I want to talk to you about is clean water. It might sound simple, but each well that we drill transforms an entire village. Depending on the area, it could be 750, 1,500. Some villages are smaller, some are larger, but the entire community, we go to unreached places of the world, is transformed with the gift of this water well. Again, I don't think I really realized the impact of it until I was traveling around Sierra Leone again, where we had done a lot of work. There was a government official there who was serving. She had moved around. She had served a lot of places in Sierra Leone. And this was the Cambia district. This was the area that she was called to serve. And she remarked on the first rainy season that she saw when she was there. And she was shocked that there wasn't a cholera outbreak when she got there. Now, part of the reason that we knew is that we had done a lot of work in that area that she was served. A lot of villages have received clean water. They were using their wells. They weren't going to the rivers and streams and collecting water anymore. Because the thing about the rainy season is that if you're collecting it from rivers and streams and all of a sudden you get this influx of a lot of rain, a lot of flooding, what may sound like a good thing for the water crisis, more water if you're struggling for water seems like a good thing. But if it's running off and if you're getting water coming down from the hills and sweeping through, is that it's becoming really contaminated just in the way it's moving through. And so often during the rainy season, while you do have more abundant sources of water, it's often more contaminated. And so outbreaks of typhoid, cholera, hepatitis A are usually more widespread during the rainy season. And so she was just shocked that the first rainy season that she got there was not this influx of cholera. Another thing that's really important in giving clean water is the maintenance of the well. So when we drill a well, we really want it to change the health forever, which means that they need infrastructure and support for maintaining the well. Oftentimes the way the wells are drilled is that a well can technically go bad due to a seal that's within the pump. It's a 5-cent part. These wells are common within the countries that we're working for. It's something that's easily available in their market. But if you don't have that seal and if you don't know how to repair it, you have this well, but it's no longer working. So it's always our goal when we go into a village to have village leadership assume ownership of the well. This means we train on how to care and maintain for the well. So if the seal goes bad, we teach them how to take the handle off, pull it up, replace the seal so it can get a good seal to continue to pull the water through, and just proper maintenance. And I'll be honest on this one, it works a lot better to get villages to take ownership of the well in some villages than others. A lot of it just depends on leadership. If you go into a village that has really good leadership, chances are good they're going to do really well maintaining their wells. If you go into a village where the leadership is a little bit weaker, sometimes they struggle. But either way, we have crews in the areas that are trained in well repair, because we also know that the most cost-effective way to give a village clean water is to repair a well that they already have. And so whether it's one of our wells, whether somebody else has come in there and done a well, we work really hard within the village on creating a system so that they can own, maintain, keep their well for generations to come. Another thing that might be simple to think about is that we drill wells deep enough into the aquifer to run consistently throughout both the rainy season and the dry. Again, we talked about the rainy season, that there's this influx of rain. So if you're drilling at the rainy season, or even if you're drilling at the beginning of the dry season, there's a lot of water. And so if you drill just to the top of the aquifer, you might be able to get water for the time being, but then once you get into the dry season and the water table drops, wells can run dry. That's not our goal. We drill way down deep into the aquifer so that we know when it hits the worst part of the dry season and the water table is at its lowest, when the villagers go to get water from the well, water will be there. Another thing that we work on is being sure that people are able to go to school. We talked about in the problem portion of this webinar that when girls are tasked with collecting water and they're spending all of that time, or when children are regularly falling ill from drinking contaminated water, they're not able to attend school and pursue their education. So drilling a water well gives this opportunity back to them. It gives them the freedom to dream of better lives for themselves. And it's something that we go into a village, we reiterate to their families how important receiving an education is for the girls. Even if they've missed a couple years of school, even if it's going to take them a little longer, we know that education is important ultimately for the future. And so we regularly have conversations that now that you have water, now that it doesn't take so long, now that you can keep your children healthy, please send your daughters back to school. The third point of impact that we work on is we work on providing employment. So we have a theory that we don't want to do for others what people can do for themselves. And honestly, part of that is because we don't want to be the American saviors who come in to save the day. Water of Life, we're currently working in 3 countries, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and India. Sierra Leone and Liberia are in West Africa for those of you who might need help. And don't feel bad. When I first started working here, I honestly had to look on a map to remember exactly where those countries are. So West Africa and India. When we went into India, they had infrastructure. So we developed a relationship with a well drilling contractor there who now does all of our wells at cost. And he makes his profit off of his for-profit well drilling business. So that's a great relationship. In Sierra Leone and Liberia, they were both coming out of civil wars when we started there. So they didn't have existing well drilling crews that we could plug into and support, but they had a lot of hardworking people who were looking for jobs. And so we brought in equipment, hired locals. That's actually one of our Sierra Leone drill crews that you see from the pictures there. And it's run by them. It's got a lot of benefits for us to be able to use the indigenous drilling crews. They understand the language and the culture better. When they go into a village, they don't have to use translators. They can speak with them. They can understand what the village need. In Africa, it's very tribal, and so they understand the differences in the areas that we go to, whether it's a Susu tribe or a Timni tribe, and what those kind of different opportunities and challenges might look like. It also supports the local economy by providing jobs. So we empower our crew members to have employment that they feel good about so that they're then able to provide for their family. The fourth point that we're focused on is we want to disrupt the statistics. We talked a lot about health challenges at the beginning and how dirty water can cause it. In most of the villages that we serve, 1 out of every 3 children die before the age of 9 months due to health issues associated with contaminated water. Excuse me. So we know if we can keep a mother healthy throughout her pregnancy, she is much more likely to carry to term, which sets the child up for a better opportunity. Also, when mothers are well hydrated, they're much more likely to provide enough nutrition for their children through nursing. So kind of it's one of the quickest results that we see when we drill a clean water is that, or when we drill a well, give clean water, the health of the village immediately improves. By giving clean water, we know that we are literally saving around 10 to 20 lives every year in a village. But the most important part, our last point of impact, we believe in everything that we do, we exist to bring God's love to people through a relationship with Jesus Christ. That is why we were there to drill wells. That is why we are giving clean water. The founder of Water of Life is really fond of saying that we are not about simply punching holes in the ground. Water of Life is an evangelical organization that just happens to do humanitarian work. This is what we're focused on. Everything that we do, the drill crews, the network of partners, everything that we've developed in order to give clean water is all pointing people towards Jesus. And we do this in kind of this process. So the first thing is that providing clean water opens the doors to sharing the gospel. Our partner in Liberia, he's a man named Dennis Agri, and he tells the story of trying to go into a village multiple times. He felt God calling on his heart. I need to share with these people. I want to share with these people. Kept trying to go in. He's Liberian himself, so he knew the culture, knew the people. Kept going multiple times wanting to share the gospel, and they kept telling him no. No, no, no. In fact, one time they looked up and said, "Do you see that cotton tree?" Which in Africa are giant trees, not kind of the fields of cotton that we think, but they're very large trees. So they said, "Do you see the cotton tree? That's our God. No Jesus business here." And he just kept getting the door shut in his face. Just kept going in, kept telling him no, but kind of this God kept telling him he was supposed to reach. And so he partnered with us when he came back with the promise of drilling a new water well. They were all of a sudden much more receptive to the idea. And if they got clean water, they became much more willing to hear about Jesus. So in many of the unreached areas, honestly, in some hostile to the gospel, where they're persecuting Christians. Dennis himself was chained to a tree at one point because they did not want to hear anything he was talking about. But giving clean water suddenly opens doors to villages that we wouldn't have access to. It's why, despite how much we've spent in getting drill rigs and getting the crews and getting the infrastructure, we've made an even bigger investment in our network of pastor partners. And again, these are local indigenous pastor partners who know how to effectively reach those that they serve. So we have a network in each one of the countries that we serve who work with our drill crews and even past our drill crews, spreading the gospel and planting churches. So what this looks like on a village basis is, first, we make it very clear that we don't want the well drilling to be about us. We actually don't put Water of Life anywhere on the wells that we drill. We want it to be about Jesus. We want it to be about our pastor partners. So anything that we do, we're always trying to point people to Jesus. So first, when they come into the village, the drill team informs the villagers that the well is not given to them by the drill crews themselves. A lot of people want to come up and say thank you, and they're always quick to point out that we came because Jesus asked. Following this, villagers are invited to join the crew and pastor partners for morning and evening Bible studies while the drill crew is there. Also, one day during the week, we use a tool called the Jesus film that usually shows one day while the drilling's there. And I had seen this outlined, but this is another thing that I don't think I fully understood until I went into the village and saw it for myself. And what I learned is that when the drill rig shows up in your village, that is not an everyday occurrence. And so for a week, the drill crew kind of becomes the village entertainment. And they start asking questions. Why are you here? What are you doing? And the answer to the why are you here question is Jesus sent us. And the what are you doing question is providing clean water and sharing a little bit about this Jesus person. And it just from there opens up a dialogue. And you can kind of see the process go week by week or day by day, in that, at first the villagers are pretty skeptical. They want to know what's going on. Can we trust these people? Are they who they say they are? But as the week goes on, as the drill crew and pastor partners are not just sharing about Jesus, but modeling it in how they treat people with respect, how they communicate among the crews. As it's a group of men living together, there's going to be disagreements, how they argue and how they solve problems. All of it is modeling what living a Christian life could look like. And so kind of day by day, they start to ask questions. They start to open up a little more, start to be a little more receptive to what's happening, until that very last day, depending on how deep the well goes, kind of between 5 to 7 days from when the well drilling process starts to when they hit water. And when they hit water, it's a lot like if you've ever seen any movie where they've hit oil, with just kind of a rush coming up, like that with water. And the day they hit water in the village, the joy was just palpable. You could see that people were so excited. You could see they got it. And kind of in that moment, everything the crews had said, that we're going to bring clean water, Jesus loves you, God cares about you, just kind of everything in that moment, they let their guard down and they started to believe because the promise that we had made that we would provide them clean water was fulfilled. But we also know that faith is more than just kind of this 1 week, one-time decision. It grows over a lifetime of following Jesus. And so we know that a long-term relationship is nurtured by the continuing presence of pastor partners. So our goal is not just that we would have conversations and this kind of one-time shot. We would tell people about Jesus and then we would leave. Our goal is for the church to grow and multiply long after we're gone. It's why our network of pastor partners is critical. And what this might look like is that the drill crews are there and a pastor partner from a neighboring village will start pastoring this village as well. And we'll kind of travel back and forth. And church looks sometimes a lot different than what we think of here. It's not always a building like you see in the picture. It's not always kind of weekly Sunday worship. Sometimes church in new communities looks like a Bible study that happens regularly under a tree. Sometimes it's groups of families coming together within someone's home and having conversations. But a pastor will oftentimes pastor multiple villages and start these conversations, start these Bible studies, eventually leading to worship. And over time, a leader is often raised up from within that village who is then trained and equipped as a pastor who can take over the village congregation of their own. And then that pastor can start pastoring another church. And so from there, it just kind of multiplies. Also, what I didn't realize is that people are hungry for hearing the word of God. I come from a very standard American experience in that if, the sermon goes over half an hour, if worship goes over hour 15 minutes, people start checking their watches. It is not like that in a lot of these villages that we serve. They have traveled sometimes for miles to hear the word of God, to be in community, to listen to a sermon. And so if that pastor preaches for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, they're insulted. I traveled this far. I want to learn more. They're hungry, and they will spend oftentimes hours in worship, just yearning for growing in the word of God. It also might look like this. So in India, we are blessed with Pastor Praveen. That's the man in the picture there you see. That's our Indian partner, and his network of pastor partners, it's called the Asylum Pastors League, has grown to over 8,000 pastors. So once Pastor Praveen has visited and shared the gospel, a pastor from his association is assigned to a community. Most pastors in his association are pastoring 7 villages each. They're not just about saying a prayer and checking a box. They want to make long-term disciples of Jesus Christ, which means that he's in it for the long haul. We're going to talk about it in the next slide, but in India, the areas that he serves primarily are Hindu, which is a lot different than the villages that we serve in Africa that are primarily either Muslim or animist. So in Hinduism, they have thousands of gods. And so when pastors go into that village and talk about Jesus, in some regards, it's not hard for them to understand. But the biggest challenge is they just want to put Jesus on the shelf with the other gods. Like, oh, you tell me about Jesus. Jesus will give me water. Great. I'll put him next to these 4 gods. And so kind of taking a step back and be like, no. Not that Jesus is a God. Jesus is the God. And here's what that means is oftentimes a process and it takes longer. And so pastors in his association moved to the villages in order to disciple, to grow the church body, to have those daily conversations when they're struggling to understand how you can have just one God and what that means. In all of our countries, we, starting last year, changed our strategy a little bit and started focusing our efforts into a single district in each country that we work in. So in Liberia right now, we're focused on Lofa County. In Sierra Leone, we're focused on an area called the Cambia district. And in India, we're focused on a district called Prakasam. There's several reasons that we started doing this. One is that it's just more economical. We're saving money on fuel and a lot less wear and tear on all of our equipment by not taking it all over the countries. It can kind of stay in one central location. The other benefit is that word of mouth spreads really quickly among neighboring villages. If you're struggling for water, the village next to you is struggling for water, the village next to you just gets a well, you better believe that village that is still struggling for water knows about the village that got a well, and they're starting to ask questions and they're wanting to know, when are we going to come to us? The other benefit of word of mouth is that that village that got the well now knows about this person called Jesus, and their lives are starting to look a little different. And husbands are starting to perhaps treat their wives differently. Neighbors are starting to care for neighbors differently. Even businesses that are not outwardly Christian businesses, when you're run by a Christian person, you start to treat your customers differently. And so as this life change happens within villages, people take notice. And I don't think I realized how drastic this was until I was spending time in villages in India. One village, we had drilled a well there a while ago. The pastor had been there. They had had a lot of opportunities, and the large majority of this village had become Christian. And a lot of times when we travel, we have kind of snacks that we bring for the kids. Sometimes we have saris that are donated that we bring for the women, but kind of things to pass out. And so when I was in this village that was primarily Christian, there was a kind of orderly, people were lined up. There were some women that had even, asked and kind of taken extra for women who were elderly, who might not be able to get up and come to us, but they wanted to be sure that these women could have a sari. So making sure that we saw them and noticed, just in general, caring for your neighbor. Contrasted with the village that we went that was still very much Hindu, and that was not the experience at all. There was a lot more grabbing, a lot more, I'm going to get mine, I'm going to push you out of the way, I'm going to try to get multiple. It just, I think because I had those experiences back to back in, going to one village that was Christian and one village that was not, just seeing the stark contrast of how when you change people's understanding, people start following Jesus, they start to become disciples. It really does have a day-to-day impact on life and how they treat other people. So word of mouth spreads quickly. People start to notice when things look different in neighboring villages. What also happens is that it creates a built-in support network for pastors. So when you plant churches close together, it makes it easier both for pastors to pastor multiple churches, but also when pastors are raised up, it creates a built-in network for them. And so they can share ideas, they can support each other in challenges that they may be having in pastoring their churches. They can share sermon ideas. Supervisors can come in and do trainings for larger groups of pastors easier when people are kind of consolidated into one different area. And what we've seen is that our efforts are really paying off. So far in the Pakistan district, we have drilled, it's a little over 250 now, but 250 villages that have received a well. And in the Pakistan district, like I said, it's primarily Hindu, well over 90% when we started. Every single village that has seen a church established and a pastor placed, all of those 250 villages that had no church when we came in now has a church, and they have a pastor to help care for their people. Also, out of those 250, nearly 100 have become Christ villages. That's our pastor's goal. He's not satisfied to just have some that want to become Christian, want to start worshiping at church. He takes the Great Commission seriously in that it says, go and make disciples of all the nations. So when he goes into a village, his goal is to have them all become disciples. So his definition of what a Christ village is that at least 80% of the people there are Christian and 100% of the village leadership is Christian. So like I said, I'm from the South, which is a pretty well-known Christian area of the country. And don't get me wrong, it is pretty Christian. But I also can't say that 80% of my town is Christian, nor am I 100% confident that 100% of my town's leadership is. But in almost 100 of those 250 villages that we've served, that is the case. 80% are actively worshiping, studying, growing together in faith, and 100% of their leadership is doing that. So it's really just a testament of the power of the Holy Spirit. And we may have opened the door in the villages to be able to go in and plant, or in order to go in and drill water wells, but past that, it is really the power of the Holy Spirit and a testament to our pastor partners faithfully doing the daily work of helping people grow in disciples. So I think that's all that I have. If there
Yes,
are
Sarah,
any questions.
thank you so much. I really appreciate what you shared. You and I had talked about this, Sarah. This is the first time we've actually done a webinar on the global water crisis. We've been doing these since 2011, and I'm really glad to add this to our archives. And one of the things I really appreciate is the integral approach that you have to providing water. You know, not only providing clean water, but also sharing living water. I think it is just really encouraging. I read a quote a few days ago that said, we should care about all human suffering, especially eternal human suffering. And when we fall short of sharing the gospel, we're really not providing mercy. So again, I appreciate that your ultimate aim is to share living water. Okay, here we go. This is from Greg Force. How many drill crews do you currently have? Do you ever have to treat the water? And do you anticipate expanding your ministry? And if so, where would you go next? So kind of a multi-part question there. How many drill crews? Do you ever have to treat water? And then if you're going to expand, where are you going next?
Those are all great questions. So like I said, in India, we use a contractor, and because his is a for-profit business and he covers all over India, I honestly have no idea how many drill crews he has. We work through him. Right now, we are drilling 17 wells a month in India. And so he just kind of assigns crews based on where they are. In Liberia, we have 3 drill crews of our own. In Sierra Leone, we actually just in December, doubled. And so we now have 2 drill crews that are working through in Sierra Leone. So we have 5 drill crews of our own, and then the contractor has a ton in India. As far as do we treat the water, there's a process in the well drilling sort of thing, where We drill deep into the aquifers, and so that water in itself is clean. However, when we drill, we stir some stuff up. And so there's usually, once we hit water, finish the casing, let the concrete set, there's some settling process that happens so that kind of all of that sediment can go back down. There's a gravel pack that is added on the outside of the pipe that is filtering when groundwater comes down from the aquifer into the pipe. So there's a filtering system. Also, right when we drill, I'm not sure the exact ratio, but there's just a very few couple drops of bleach or chlorine that kind of sanitizes kind of the whole bit. But then once it's sealed, concreted, there's PVC pipe, so it's cased the whole way down. There's very limited opportunity from contamination from the groundwater up to the well. So kind of that, if it's going to get contaminated, it's going to be when we're drilling. So treat it initially, but then there's not ongoing treatment that's needed. And then as far as expanding, we kind of just leave that open to God. We don't have a master plan of here's the village or here's the new countries that we want to come into. What we look for is, one, are they in need? Two, is there pastor partners that are local that are doing ministry within the areas that they're looking to serve that we can connect with and empower? And then third, is there funding from the states? Can we afford to do that? I really believe that God opened the doors for all three of the countries that we're in. India is our newest country, and surprisingly enough, we ended up there through Facebook, which is kind of random, but our partner messaged, I think, every single water organization he could find, because every village that he was going to share the gospel kept telling him no, or every village that he went to needed clean water. And so he messaged a whole bunch of water organizations in the States. We apparently were the only ones that we replied, and we initially told him no. But he was just persistent and kept asking, and we continued the conversation. And now in hindsight, seeing kind of all that God's done in India, we feel like it only could have happened through God. And so we don't currently have plans to expand, but we're also open to, if God wants us to go somewhere and opens the doors with funding and partners to make it happen, then we're open to it.
So, Sarah, let me expand on that question a little bit. I imagine some of the churches online probably already have areas of focus. They have mission fields they're already engaged in. And so Water of Life's probably not a candidate to go to those locations necessarily. Could be. Are there organizations that you could recommend that would be, that could come alongside a church to help with water in a specific area? Is there anyone in that space, in the clean water space?
Yeah, there's the thing about the global water crisis is that it's giant, but the good thing is that we're not the only one. There are lots of organizations that are working for water. I would, not to brag on us too much, I would say we're pretty unique in that we have the pastor partners in water that works well together. But there are lots of other water organizations that, if there's an area that your pastors are serving that need water, Water Org, Charity Water, Living Water, some of the biggest ones that are in a wide range. But usually if you just Google kind of water organizations in the country that you're working in, usually there are people that will pop up and just kind of start that conversation. I can't speak to their process or how they
sure I totally understand that,
and where they go, but there are lots of organizations, and we're pretty open with, if we're not there, trying to connect you with someone who is.
Yeah, great. So this is more of an encouragement. This is from Michael. He mentions he's from New England, but when you mentioned the day they hit water, the joy was just palpable, and the guards came down and people started to believe. He said this brought tears to my eyes, and I was just thinking of John 7. There's physical water bubbling up out of the ground, but in John 7:38, whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. So it just got this picture of physical clean water bubbling up out of the ground, and then living water welling up out of these new believers. So just an encouragement there. Um,
Thank you.
Sarah, yeah. So let's see here. I've got another question for you. This is about ownership. So is there a renewal and replacement fund for repairs and maintenance? Do the villagers accept ownership, or do you have to periodically return to care for the well? So is there some fund for ongoing maintenance, and how often are you returning to take care of the well?
It looks different in different areas. So in India, that's something that our partner does. It's part of his maintenance plan. Again, he's got a vast network of drill crews that can go through. And so he, once a year, checks on all the wells, inspects them. If he repairs them, he paints them blue, so he knows that they've already been repaired. So he handles that. In Africa, we do have kind of a replacement rehab sort of fund for a couple purposes. One is, again, we're not the only well drilling crew that's operating in the areas that we're serving. And so sometimes we'll come upon a well that was not drilled by us that needs to be repaired. Sometimes it's just a seal. Sometimes the entire casing is collapsed and we need to go in and fix that. And so we do have some money if this village needs water, but they don't necessarily need a brand new well, that we can go in and rehab or repair the well that they have. For villages that are great at taking ownership, a lot of times they'll collect money from within the village themselves, kind of everybody chip in a little bit, because they've seen how this well has changed their life, and so they want to preserve that. And so if they need a $5 part, every family might pitch in 5 cents, and then they can go and they can get that part. So that's kind of the ideal, because long term, we don't want them to be dependent on us to continue to care for the well. Right. So we're always working towards villages to be more self-sufficient and to take ownership of their well. The other benefit of having the network of pastor partners is that oftentimes village leadership ends up being somehow associated with the pastor. And so if there really is a problem that the village can't solve on their own, that pastor's tied in with our lead kind of partner pastor, who can quickly get in touch with the drill crew and they can come in and help out. So kind of complicated answer, but also because it looks different in all of the areas that we're serving.
Yeah, it sounds like it's based upon the uniqueness of each village and how they respond, whether or not there's leadership. So that's good. So Michael has another comment here, really interesting. He mentions that another water drilling ministry that he was connected with 10 to 20 years ago talked about 1.3 billion people who did not have access to clean water. And the numbers you mentioned today, I think between 663 and 844, depending on how you measure those. So almost a 50% improvement. His question is, at the current rate, can we see the water crisis go away in the next 10 to 20 years? And what would you say to motivate us?
I'm hopeful. I'm not sure that 10 years is realistic, partly because overall the number is going down, but also the overall population of the world is increasing. But I'm really hopeful. We're partnered with an organization in Liberia called The Last Well that has made it their goal to provide every man, woman, and child living in Liberia with clean water by the end of 2020. So in the next 2 years, that's their goal, is to have every person living in Liberia with access to clean water. It's another benefit of when we started going district by district, is that if you look at that 800 million number, it can seem really overwhelming, but we can finish a district. We've finished 2 districts so far in Liberia. We're about 70% or so way through finishing the Prakasam district in India. And so again, I don't know that all of that 800 or so million people will have access to clean water in 10 years, but I do believe in my lifetime it'll happen. And I think when you go kind of district by district, you take kind of slow and steady, bite by bite, that we can get there.
Yeah, oh, that's encouraging. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your time today, sharing your insight, sharing a little bit about Water of Life. I'm going to leave this screen up here for just a moment. For those of you online who would like to learn more, you can email Sarah right there and also visit the website. And I don't see the website on there, Sarah. What is your web? It was maybe a
That's all
previous
right.
slide.
It's just that in. So if you go to givefreshwater.org.
Givefreshwater.org. Got it.
Yep.
Great. I want to emphasize something again. I brought it up earlier, but it's something I appreciate about your approach and what you shared today. And that is, again, an integral approach that is seeking, yes, to do good deeds that they may, glorify our Father in heaven, but also making sure that you're sharing living water. So again, I think this is from John Piper. I can't remember where I picked it up, but we must care about all suffering, especially eternal suffering. And I appreciate that emphasis that you have, Sarah, with Water of Life. So there's my information. If you'd like to know more about 1615 and church missions coaching, you can visit 1615.org. There's my email. And for those of you still online, again, just mention of a few resources here. The book, When Everything is Missions. You can pick it up at wheneverythingismissions.com. Please tune into the mission table. A lot of great episodes, engaging panel of speakers on every episode. So we hope you will take advantage of that free resource. And today's webinar, I want to remind you again, has been recorded. It will be archived, so you can share it with others in your network once it's up there. But you can also look at our library of over 50 webinars that you can view on a variety of great topics. So once again, Sarah, thank you so much for taking time to share with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been really great, Sarah. Look forward to ongoing partnership. Thanks, everyone, for being online today. I'm Matthew Ellison for 1615, signing off.
Thank you.